Imagine waking up tomorrow and every religious ritual on earth has simply vanished overnight. No weddings in churches, no Friday prayers, no bar mitzvahs, no Diwali lights, no funeral rites for the dead. Just gone. Most people assume the world would instantly become calmer, more rational, maybe even cleaner, and most people would be spectacularly wrong, which, to be fair, is something humans have a long and distinguished track record of. Here's the honest premise. Religious ritual touches roughly 84% of the human population in some active way. That is not a rounding error. That is nearly the entire species organizing a portion of its life around repeated symbolic acts. Lighting candles, fasting, chanting, gathering, mourning in specific patterns. When you imagine pulling that thread out of the fabric, the question is not whether anything changes. The question is what collapses first, and whether you would even recognize the rubble. Take one small town. Imagine a mid-sized community somewhere unremarkable, a few thousand people, one main street, the usual mix of grocery stores and old arguments. In that town, the local church runs the only food bank. The mosque organizes the neighborhood cleanup twice a year. The Hindu temple hosts the one public space where elderly residents gather every week so they are not entirely alone. None of those people necessarily agree on theology. But the ritual structure, the showing up, the calendar, the shared obligation, is the invisible scaffolding holding three different kinds of community need together. Remove it on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday you have a food bank with no volunteers, two elderly people who have not spoken to anyone in 4 days, and a parking lot full of litter. That is the first thing that falls apart. Social infrastructure. Scholars who study religion do not tend to be the most exciting people at parties, but they have spent decades documenting something genuinely surprising. Religious ritual is one of the most efficient community coordination technologies ever invented. It works not despite the repetition, but because of it. The repetition is the point. When you do the same thing, at the same time, with the same people, year after year, it builds trust faster than almost any other mechanism humans have found. And trust, it turns out, is load-bearing. But let us keep pulling the thread. Say we accept the loss of the social infrastructure. Say modern governments, apps, and civic organizations step in to fill those gaps, which they would try to do with all the warmth and spontaneity of a government form. What about grief? This is where the thought experiment gets genuinely uncomfortable. Every human culture that has ever existed has developed ritual around death. Every single one, without exception, going back at least 100,000 years based on archaeological evidence, burial sites, grave goods, markings. Human beings apparently decided very early on that leaving the dead unacknowledged was something they were not willing to do. Grief without ritual is not just sad. Psychologists who study bereavement have found consistently that structured mourning, the funeral, the wake, the sitting Shiva, the 40-day ceremony, actually accelerates the healthy processing of loss. The ritual gives grief a container. It tells the grieving person, there is a shape to this. It has a beginning and a movement, and the people around you are here on purpose. Without that container, grief tends to sprawl. It becomes chronic. The body does not know when the mourning period ends, so sometimes it just does not end. So now we are in a world without food banks, without trust infrastructure, and with uncontained grief multiplying quietly in every household that has recently lost someone. And here is where the story takes its real turn, because here is what actually happened in societies that tried hard to reduce or replace religious ritual, and several have tried. The Soviet Union ran one of the most systematic campaigns in history to replace religious ceremony with secular alternatives. They created state-sponsored birth celebrations called Oktobrina, secular wedding palaces, civic funeral rites. They did not eliminate the human need for ritual. They just repackaged it with different symbols. The May Day parades, the Lenin mausoleum visits, the synchronized mass performances. These were rituals. They had all the structural features: repetition, community, symbolic objects, designated times, emotional stakes. The costumes changed. The architecture of human behavior did not move an inch. And this is the part that most people never reach when they imagine a religion-free world. The assumption is that secular life is the absence of ritual, but secular life is absolutely saturated with ritual. The graduation ceremony, where you wear a specific costume and walk in a specific order to receive a piece of paper you already earned 3 months ago, that is ritual. The sports stadium where 60,000 people perform synchronized grief or joy based on the movement of a ball, that is ritual. New Year's Eve, where the entire species agrees to stand in a cold place and count backwards for no logistical reason whatsoever. Ritual. Even the weekly rhythm of the work week, the weekend as sacred recovery time, the annual performance review. These are all structured, repeated, symbolic acts that organize collective life. We did not abandon ritual. We are biologically incapable of abandoning ritual. Neuroscience has started to explain why. Repeated symbolic actions appear to reduce anxiety by creating predictability. The brain experiences ritual as a form of control, even when the ritual has no direct causal effect on outcomes. A baseball player who taps the plate 3 times before batting is not affecting the physics of the pitch, but their nervous system is calmer, their focus is tighter, and their performance measurably improves. Scale that up to a civilization trying to process death, mark time, build trust, and answer questions about why any of this suffering is worth enduring. And you begin to understand why ritual is not a quirk of primitive thinking. It is a technology so old and so effective that the human brain appears to have partially organized itself around it. So, what does a world without religious ritual actually look like? It looks like a world that immediately and frantically invents new rituals to replace the ones it lost. The void does not stay empty. It cannot. Within a generation, the new rituals calcify, accumulate symbolic weight, become impossible to question, and start looking, from the outside, remarkably familiar. The form changes. The function is permanent. What you should take away from this is not that religion is beyond criticism, or that every ritual deserves preservation. Some rituals have caused genuine harm and deserve to be retired loudly. But the instinct underneath, the human drive to mark time together, to hold grief in a shared structure, to coordinate trust through repetition, that instinct is not going anywhere. The honest question is not whether we will have rituals. The honest question is whether we will be thoughtful about which ones we build, and why, and who they actually serve. Because the alternative is not a clean, rational world free of ceremony. The alternative is a world where the rituals happen anyway, built fast and thoughtlessly, optimized for whoever had the resources to build them first. And that should make you think carefully about which gatherings you choose, and what you are actually doing when you show up. If you liked this video, there is more like this, so follow the channel for the next one.